My name's Don Binkley. I'm coming to you from Property Providers, Sydney's most flexible residential rental company. A lot of people believe that their only option to rent a residential property is to lease it, and that is actually not true. There is another vehicle that you guys can use, which is licensing, which may provide landlords with more protection, more flexibility, more options, and more security in the current environment. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is leasing. Now, most residential property managers and landlords will be quite familiar with leasing because leasing's been around for 100 years. The framework is very rigid. There is a lot of compliance adherence in leasing. There's set legislation around it, and it's got jurisdiction, and it is unabashedly in the tenant's favor. So over the past 20, 30, 50 years, there have been little changes, and it's been kind of death by a thousand cuts, to be honest, on empowering the tenant and keeping the tenant safe and providing the tenant security, and not so much protection for landlords. Some of the key terms around leasing are a residential tenancies agreement. That agreement is bound by the Land, Stock and Agents Act. The occupant of the dwelling is a tenant. That tenant has an exclusive right to occupy the property. They pay rent. That has big connotations in itself. They're paying, in terms of security onto the property, they're paying a bond. That bond is managed by New South Wales Fair Trading, which means any dispute around that bond is managed by New South Wales Fair Trading, or NCAT, which is the New South Wales Civil and Administration Tribunal. The bottom line is lots of regulation, lots of adherence, lots of compliance, totally in the tenant's favor. So the other way of managing a property is through a licensing agreement. Now, we've been doing this for a number of years as it relates to our experience in short-term executive rentals. And the reason why we've been using it is because a licensing agreement is not bound by jurisdiction to start. So that means that we can sign up a customer as an occupant literally anywhere in the world. We can transact anywhere in the world as it relates to an occupant. The second thing that is interesting about a licensing agreement is that the occupant can be deemed a guest. Now, that occupant who's deemed a guest can be given a non-exclusive license to occupy. So what that means is that effectively the owner gets more power and control over the property. The third thing is about the monies that are paid. In this case, it's the tariff, and the security is monies that is held within our trust account. So we administer it. We administer any conflict as it relates to the money held in the trust account versus it being in fair trading. And the last thing is that if you look at the guest, the owner, the non-exclusive license to occupy, that is all wrapped up into a commercial contract, which is actually far more balanced in our view, taking into account the owner's risks and the owner's commitments and the owner's obligations as it relates to the rental agreement. So let's just wrap up let's just compare and contrast leasing versus licensing. Let's first talk about jurisdiction. A lease agreement is bound by the state legislation. In our case, it's New South Wales. Whereas in a licensing scenario, that license is not bound by jurisdiction, so we can sign it up anywhere in the world. Goes without saying that we're operating in a global context at the moment. The second thing is the right to occupy. So in a lease, that tenant has an exclusive right to occupy the property. In a licensing agreement, it can be drafted in such a way, the way ours is drafted, in such a way where that customer or that guest in this case has a non-exclusive license to occupy. The third is about the security in the property. In a leasing agreement, the security is held as a bond at fair trading. In a license, it's a security deposit held in our trust account. The third thing is how the contract is administered. In the licensing scenario, this is a lease agreement that is bound by the Land, Stock and Agents Act, so highly regulated. And in the licensing capacity, this is a commercial contract, and as long as that is a fair and balanced commercial contract, it is absolutely valid. So in contrast, what we're looking at is an old piece of leasing, which is an old, in our view, an old piece of legislation, versus licensing, which I think is far more flexible and takes into account, the current rather volatile situation. I started off by saying we're Sydney's most flexible residential rental company. What this means is that we're able to provide our owners, our owner partners, both a licensing option as well as a leasing option. So we're actually able to double down on how many options you have, given what your circumstances are. You might have a lease extension coming up, and you might go, rather than extend a lease, I would like to extend a licensing agreement. You might want to put a short-term licensing agreement in place to ride through this volatility. But the bottom line is that as a landlord, you have more options than perhaps what you think you do in terms of the benefits, the features and benefits and advantages around leasing versus licensing. Should you be interested in learning more about this, please give us a call or visit our website.